You want to talk about corruption, Professor? Let's talk about how your wife made $1.5 million from a single phone call. The air inside the Phoenix Convention Center didn't just change, it evaporated. 5,000 people, who had been buzzing with the frantic energy of a rock concert mixed with a political revival, suddenly went dead silent. It was the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Donald Trump stood at the center of the stage, one hand resting casually on a podium that looked more like a witness stand, the other gesturing toward a small, unassuming table to his right. On that table sat 3 thick beige manila folders. They weren't props. They were bulging with papers, protruding sticky notes, and red inked margins. They looked heavy. They looked dangerous. Across from him, Congressman Jamie Raskin adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a nervous tic that betrayed the cool, professorial persona he had spent a lifetime cultivating. Raskin had arrived in Arizona expecting a debate on constitutional norms. He had prepared lectures on the Federalist Papers, rehearsed sound bites about threats to democracy, and anticipated a shouting match about January 6th. He was wearing his signature tweed jacket, a sartorial choice meant to project intellect and stability against the chaotic populism of Trump. He had come to lecture an unruly student. Instead, he found himself staring down a prosecutor who had brought the receipts. The event had been billed as a constitutional dialogue, a high-minded attempt by a local media consortium to bridge the partisan divide. But from the moment the doors opened at dawn, the atmosphere inside the convention center felt less like a dialogue and more like a gladiatorial arena. The January air in Phoenix was crisp, but inside, the temperature hovered in the 80s, fueled by body heat and adrenaline. MAGA hats created a sea of red that washed against the stage, while a smaller, determined pocket of Raskin supporters held signs reading, "Protect Our Democracy," near the press risers. The moderator, a local news anchor named Sarah Jenkins, who looked increasingly like she regretted accepting the assignment, tried to intervene. She tapped her microphone, the feedback whining through the massive speaker system. "Gentlemen, please," she stammered, her voice thin against the tension in the room. "We agreed to a set of ground rules regarding civility and topic adherence. We are here to discuss the future of the Republic." "Ground rules," Trump interrupted, but he didn't shout. His voice was dangerously low, amplified to a bass rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. He turned to the crowd, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Jamie here spent 4 years accusing me of every crime in the book. Russian agent, insurrectionist, tax cheat. You name it. He accused me of it on MSNBC every Sunday morning. But when I bring actual documents, actual bank records, actual federal disclosures, suddenly we need ground rules to protect his feelings." The crowd roared its approval, a sound like a physical blow. A veteran in the third row, his chest heavy with medals, stood up and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Let him speak. We want the truth." Raskin leaned into his microphone, trying to regain the high ground. He smiled that thin, condescending smile that had infuriated Republicans for years during the impeachment hearings. "Mr. Trump," Raskin began, his voice dripping with the patience of a kindergarten teacher explaining why we don't eat paste. "If you are going to make wild, unsubstantiated accusations to distract from your own legal peril, perhaps we should simply end this charade now. The American people deserve a serious conversation, not conspiracy theories." "Wild accusations?" Trump repeated, savoring the phrase. He walked over to the table and picked up the first folder. He held it up, showing the label to the cameras. It read, in black Sharpie, Reserve Trust. Jamie, these aren't accusations, Trump said, dropping the folder back onto the table with a heavy thud. These are government documents. These are federal financial disclosures. Or, in your case, the federal disclosures you forgot to file for 8 months. The press section, packed with reporters from the New York Times, CNN, and Fox News, suddenly stopped their casual chatting. Heads snapped up. Laptops opened. This wasn't the usual stump speech. Trump wasn't riffing about windmills or water pressure. He was specific. He was cited. He was armed. "Wait until you hear what happens next," Trump said to the crowd with a conspiratorial wink, "because the professor is about to get a lesson in economics." Raskin's smile faltered. His eyes darted to the folders, then back to the moderator, silently pleading for an intervention. But it was too late. The energy in the room had shifted irrevocably. The audience wasn't there for a debate anymore. They were there for an exposure. Trump signaled to the tech crew in the back. "Put it up," he commanded. Behind them, the massive LED screens that had been displaying the event logo flickered and changed. What appeared wasn't a campaign slogan or a flag. It was a timeline, a stark, white-on-black timeline with dates, dollar amounts, and names. It was a visual indictment, 40 feet high. "So, Professor," Trump said, drawing out the title with just enough mockery to make it sting. "Since you are so concerned about ethics and conflicts of interest and the rule of law, let's talk about your family business. Let's talk about how your wife turned a government connection into a fortune. And let's talk about why you broke the law to hide it from the American people." Raskin reached for his water glass. His hand trembled, just a fraction of an inch. But on the giant 4K screens, it looked like an earthquake. The trap had been sprung. The professor had walked into the lion's den carrying a textbook, and the lion was hungry. The lights in the convention center dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the massive screen looming behind the two men. The timeline projected there was devastating in its simplicity. It didn't need commentary to be damning. The dates spoke for themselves. Trump picked up a laser pointer, the red dot dancing across the digital surface like a targeting reticle. "Let me set the scene, folks," Trump began, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "It's 2017. I'm in the White House working on tax cuts. Jamie here is in Congress, planning his first impeachment. And Jamie's wife, Sarah Bloom Raskin, a lovely woman, I'm sure, very smart, she decides to join the board of a little financial technology company called Reserve Trust." Trump paused, looking at Raskin with mock confusion, his brow furrowed. "Now, I'm just a businessman from Queens, but even I know that when a former high-ranking Treasury official and Federal Reserve governor joins a company's board right after leaving government, that's called the revolving door. You've heard that phrase, right, Jamie? You use it to attack Republicans all the time. But when you do it, I guess it's just consulting." Raskin shifted in his seat, leaning forward to interrupt. "My wife is a distinguished legal scholar and financial expert. Her career is independent of—" "Shh!" Trump shooshed him, holding up a finger. "I'm teaching now, Professor. Your turn comes later. Pay attention. This is going to be on the test." The crowd laughed, a harsh, raucous sound. Trump circled a date on the screen, May 2017. "So Sarah joins this board in May," Trump continued, "and that was very lucky timing for Reserve Trust, because this little company wanted something very special. They wanted something that no other fintech company in the history of the United States had ever gotten. They wanted a Fed master account." Trump turned to the audience, spreading his arms wide. Now, that sounds boring, right? Fed master account? Who cares? But let me tell you what it is. It is a golden ticket. It allows a company to bypass traditional banks and plug directly into the Federal Reserve's payment system. It's like having a direct line to the money printer. It is worth billions. It is the holy grail of banking. He turned back to the screen. In June 2017, Reserve Trust applied for this account. And guess what? They got rejected. Denied. The Federal Reserve said, "No way. You don't qualify. Go home." Trump snapped his fingers, the sound echoing in the microphone. But then, something magical happened. The screen changed. The timeline was replaced by a phone log, stamped with the official seal of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. A single entry was highlighted in bright neon yellow. Sarah Bloom Raskin places a personal call to Esther George, the president of the Kansas City Fed. Trump read from the screen. Not a lawyer, not a lobbyist. Sarah, the former boss, calling her former subordinate. The crowd was dead silent now, absorbing the implication. This wasn't abstract political theory. This was the swamp in action. She picks up the phone, Trump narrated, miming the action. She says, "Hello, Esther. It's Sarah. Remember me? I used to be your boss at the Fed. I'm on this board now, and we really need this account. Can you help a friend out?" "That is a gross mischaracterization of," Raskin shouted, losing his cool. "And what do you know?" Trump boomed, drowning him out. Suddenly, miraculously, the answer changed. In 2018, Reserve Trust gets their second application approved. They become the only fintech company in America to get a master account. Not PayPal, not Square, just the company paying Jamie Raskin's wife. Trump turned to face Raskin directly, walking to the edge of his podium so there was nothing between them but air and accusation. "Now, Jamie, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe this was all just a giant coincidence. Maybe the fact that your wife, who spent years as a Fed governor, knew exactly who to call and exactly what strings to pull, had nothing to do with it. Is that what you're telling these good people? That it was just luck?" Raskin's face had gone from confident to a flushed, blotchy red. He stammered, "My wife's professional qualifications speak for themselves. She advocated for regulatory clarity." "Oh, I'm sure she's very qualified," Trump said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She was certainly qualified enough to know exactly how much those stock options she got for joining the board would be worth once the fix was in." Trump pointed the laser at the final number on the screen. It was huge. $1,500,000. $1.5 million, folks, Trump said, letting the words hang there. That is what Sarah sold her shares for in December 2020. Nearly 200,000 shares turned into cash. That is more money than 10 American families make in a year. From 2 years on a board. From one phone call. A teacher in the audience, Rebecca Chen from Tempe, stood up on her chair. She was shaking, tears of rage in her eyes. "I make $45,000 a year teaching kids," she screamed, her voice breaking. "And you're telling me his wife made $1.5 million from a phone call?" The crowd erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was a growl of collective indignation. People were on their feet, pointing at Raskin, shouting, "Shame!" and "Corruption!" Trump waited for the noise to die down, but he didn't ask for quiet. He let Raskin sit in the noise. He let him feel the heat of 5,000 people who worked for a living, looking at a man who profited from his position. "But, Rebecca," Trump said into the microphone, his voice cutting through the din, "that isn't even the worst part. The worst part isn't that they made the money. The worst part is that Jamie broke the law to hide it from you." Trump reached for the second folder. Let's talk about the cover-up. The number $1.5 million remained on the massive screen, glowing in neon green, a stark reminder of the windfall the Raskin family had secured. But Trump wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at Jamie Raskin with the intensity of a forensic accountant who has just found the missing page in a ledger. "Now, Rebecca," Trump said, addressing the teacher who was still standing, trembling with righteous anger in the audience. "That's a lot of money, but that's not even the best part. See, in this country, we have laws, and one of those laws is called the Stock Act." Trump walked back to the table and tapped the first folder. "It's a very simple law, Jamie. You know it well. You voted for it. It says that when a member of Congress, or their spouse, makes a stock trade, they have to tell the American people, you have 45 days. That's the rule. 45 days to file a piece of paper that says, hey, look at this trade I made. Transparency, sunlight, all those things you love to talk about on MSNBC. He pulled a physical document from the folder, a stapled set of forms with a congressional seal at the top. He held it up to the light. "This is Jamie's financial disclosure form regarding that sale," Trump announced. "I want everyone to look at the date stamp." The screen behind them shifted. It displayed a zoomed-in image of the document Trump was holding. 2 dates were highlighted in red boxes. Date of sale, December 18, 2020. Date of filing, August 2021. Trump let the silence stretch, calculating the math for the audience. December to August, Trump counted on his fingers. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. 8 months. You waited 240 days to tell the American people that your wife just cashed out of the company she helped get a government license. "That isn't 45 days, Jamie," Trump said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "That is a cover-up." Raskin leaned into his microphone. His face was pale, his expression pained. This was the moment he had dreaded. "Mr. Trump," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "as I have stated publicly, we lost our son, Tommy, during that period. It was a time of immense grief for our family. Administrative paperwork was not my priority." The room went quiet. It was a tragedy everyone knew about, a loss that no parent should endure. For a moment, the tension shifted. Would Trump attack a grieving father? Trump's expression softened, but he didn't back down. He nodded slowly. "And I am truly, deeply sorry for your loss, Jamie. Tommy was a brilliant young man. No parent should ever have to bury a child. That is a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy." The sincerity in Trump's voice was palpable, and the room relaxed slightly. But then, the steel returned to his eyes. "But, Jamie," Trump continued, "we have to be honest about the timeline. During those same 8 months, while you were too grief-stricken to file a 2-page disclosure form, what else were you doing?" Trump pointed to the screen. A new montage appeared. It showed Jamie Raskin in the Senate chamber, commanding the floor. It showed him on CNN. It showed him writing op-eds. "You were leading the second impeachment against me," Trump said. "You stood in the well of the Senate for hours at a time, prosecuting your case. You gave interviews. You wrote legal briefs. You were functioning at the highest possible level as a member of Congress." Trump walked to the edge of the stage. "So, you had the energy to try to destroy a president. You had the energy to go on television. But you didn't have 5 minutes to disclose that your wife just became a millionaire?" "That doesn't wash, Professor," Trump said. "The law is the law. You don't get a grief exemption for insider trading laws while you are busy impeaching people." Raskin sat frozen. He had used his tragedy as a shield, and Trump had just gently, but firmly, moved it aside. "And just so we are clear on your standards," Trump said, "let's look at what you think about transparency." He signaled the booth. "Play the clip." The screen showed a video from 2019. Jamie Raskin was speaking into a microphone at a committee hearing, looking indignant. "Public officials must be held to the highest standard of transparency," the digital Raskin declared, his voice booming through the hall. "The American people have a right to know about any financial dealings that could represent conflicts of interest. There can be no exceptions, no excuses." The video froze on Raskin's face. "No exceptions," Trump repeated, reading the words off the screen. "No excuses. Those are your words, Jamie." "You want to put grandmothers in jail for walking through the Capitol," Trump said, his voice rising. "You want to put me in jail for paperwork disputes at Mar-a-Lago. But when you violate a federal law to hide $1.5 million, it's just an oversight? It's just a mistake?" An elderly man near the front, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, stood up. "My grandson can't even get a small business loan," he shouted, his voice cracking. "And this guy breaks the law and keeps the money?" Trump pointed at the veteran. "That is exactly right, sir. That is the two-tiered system. They write the laws for you, but they don't follow them themselves." "This is the ethics complaint filed against you," Trump said, tossing the document back onto the table. "Failure to disclose the holdings. Failure to report the sale. In the real world, if you or I did that, the SEC would be knocking on our door. But for Jamie Raskin, it's just another day in the swamp." "So, let's recap," Trump said, closing the first folder. "Your wife used her connections to get a special government favor. She made a fortune. You broke the law to hide it for 8 months. And you used your personal tragedy to excuse your corruption. That," Trump said, staring Raskin down, "is not a public servant. That is a grifter." Jamie Raskin was reeling. The combination of the financial timeline and the exposure of his Stock Act violation had stripped away his moral authority. He sat slumped in his chair, no longer the confident constitutional scholar, but a politician caught in a lie. But Trump wasn't done. He reached for the second folder. This one was blue, labeled simply, "The Biden Defense." "You know what I find interesting, Jamie?" Trump asked, tapping the folder with his index finger. "You have spent the last 4 years investigating everyone. You investigated me twice. You investigated my businesses, my taxes, my family, my phone calls. You investigated my supporters." Trump paused, looking out at the crowd with a theatrical expression of confusion. "But when it comes to your own party, when it comes to actual, documented, bank-recorded corruption, suddenly, Jamie Raskin can't find his reading glasses." The crowd laughed, a sharp, cynical sound. They knew exactly where this was going. Trump flipped the folder open. "Let's talk about Joe Biden," he said. Raskin immediately straightened up, his defensive instincts kicking in. "This is a partisan witch hunt," he blurted out, finding his voice. "Chairman Comer and the Republicans have wasted millions of dollars and haven't found a single shred of evidence linking President Biden to any wrongdoing." "Really?" Trump asked, his eyebrows shooting up. "Not a shred? Jamie, I have the bank records right here." Trump pulled out a stack of papers, heavily highlighted. "We aren't talking about anonymous sources," Trump said. "We aren't talking about a dossier paid for by Hillary Clinton. We are talking about suspicious activity reports from the U.S. Treasury. We are talking about wire transfers from J.P. Morgan Chase." He held up a graphic that appeared on the screen behind him. It was a flow chart of money. "Here is the money trail," Trump narrated, using his laser pointer. "Money comes from a Chinese energy company, CEFC. It goes into a shell company run by Hunter Biden. It gets washed through another company. And then, a check for $40,000 lands in Joe Biden's bank account. Another check for $200,000 lands in Joe Biden's account." "Those were loan repayments," Raskin interrupted, reciting the party line. "That has been debunked." "Funny how every questionable payment to a Biden is always a loan repayment," Trump scoffed. "Hunter gets millions from Ukraine? Loan? Millions from China? Loan? Where is the loan documentation, Jamie? Where are the interest payments? If I took $200,000 from a Chinese energy company and called it a loan, you would have impeached me a third time before breakfast." Trump walked to the center of the stage. "But it isn't just the money. It's the cover-up, and you were part of it." "Let's talk about the laptop," Trump said. The crowd murmured. The Hunter Biden laptop story was the open wound of the 2020 election. "In October 2020, Trump said, the New York Post published a story about Hunter's laptop. It showed evidence of corruption. It showed the big guy getting 10%. It was real. The FBI had it. They knew it was real." "But what did you do, Jamie?" Trump asked. He pulled a letter from the folder. "You and your friends in the intelligence community, 51 of them, signed a letter saying the laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation." "We were warning about foreign interference," Raskin insisted. "You were lying," Trump roared. "You knew it wasn't Russia. The FBI verified it in 2019. But you went on TV, you went on Twitter, and you told the American people it was fake. You censored the story. You got big tech to ban the New York Post." Trump turned to the audience. "They rigged the information. That is election interference. If the American people had known the truth about the Biden family business, the polling shows the election would have been different." And Jamie Raskin was one of the loudest voices pushing that lie. A construction worker in the middle section stood up, cupping his hands. "They think we're stupid," he shouted. "They do," Trump agreed, pointing at the man. "They think you are stupid. They think they can tell you water isn't wet. They think they can tell you a laptop full of crimes is Russian disinformation, and you'll just nod your head." The screen behind Trump changed again. It showed a compilation video, a supercut of Jamie Raskin. Clip 1, Raskin on MSNBC. "This investigation is a fairy tale. There is no smoking gun." Clip 2, Raskin in a committee hearing. "This is nothing but Russian propaganda meant to smear the president." Clip 3, Raskin on CNN. "The Republicans are chasing ghosts." Trump let the video play, letting Raskin's own dismissive, arrogant tone fill the hall. "Thoroughly demolished," Trump quoted Raskin from the screen. "That's what you called the evidence, but the bank records are still there, Jamie. The wire transfers are still there. The WhatsApp messages where Hunter threatens his Chinese partners while sitting next to his father? Those are still there." "You ignored all of it," Trump said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "You blocked witnesses. You smeared whistleblowers. You attacked the IRS agents who tried to come forward." "You weren't acting as a congressman," Trump said. "You were acting as a defense attorney for the Biden crime family, and you were doing it on the taxpayer's dime." "I have a duty to defend the truth," Raskin stammered, looking smaller than ever. "You have a duty to the Constitution," Trump corrected him. "Not to Joe Biden, not to the Democratic Party, to the truth. And you sacrifice the truth to protect your power." Trump closed the blue folder. "You investigate me for phone calls. You investigate me for tweets. But when there are millions of dollars flowing from our enemies into the bank accounts of the president's family, you see nothing. You hear nothing. You speak nothing. That is selective justice, Trump declared, and it is the hallmark of a corrupt regime. But speaking of selective justice, Trump said, his hand moving to the third folder, his expression darkening, there is one area where your silence is even louder. One area where you protect your friends, even when the victims are children. Let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. The atmosphere in the Phoenix Convention Center shifted from anger to something colder, darker, and infinitely more uncomfortable. The blue glow of the Biden defense graphic faded from the massive screens, leaving the stage momentarily in shadow. Trump stood at the podium, his hand resting heavily on the third folder. This one wasn't beige or blue. It was black. "We've talked about money," Trump said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register that made the hairs on the back of necks stand up. "Money is dirty. Corruption is dirty. But what we are about to talk about isn't just dirty. It's evil." He looked at Jamie Raskin, not with triumph, but with a look of genuine disgust. "Jamie, you love to talk about moral character. You love to lecture the country about who is fit to serve. You spent years trying to destroy my reputation based on a hoax dossier. But when it comes to the real predators, the real monsters, your moral compass suddenly stops working." Trump flipped the black folder open. He didn't pull out a document this time. He signaled the booth. "Put them up," he commanded. The screen illuminated. A collective gasp, followed by a low, horrified murmur, rippled through the audience of 5,000 people. These weren't charts. They were photographs. Recently released, high-resolution images from the Jeffrey Epstein files. The first photo showed a man in a jacuzzi. He was smiling, relaxed, holding a cigar. It was Bill Clinton. Sitting next to him was a young woman, her face obscured by a digital black box to protect her identity. "Bill Clinton," Trump said, saying the name like a curse word. "Your party's elder statesman, the man you call a hero, in a jacuzzi with a victim of sex trafficking." The screen cycled to the next image. Clinton on the tarmac with Epstein. Clinton leaning into the doorway of the private jet, known as the Lolita Express. "We aren't talking about a casual acquaintance, Jamie," Trump said. "We are talking about dozens of flights. We are talking about visits to the island. We are talking about a former president of the United States associating with the most prolific pedophile in history." Trump turned to Raskin. Now, when these photos came out just a few weeks ago, the American people were horrified. They wanted answers. They wanted to know why the Department of Justice wasn't looking into this. "But you," Trump pointed a finger at Raskin, "you went on CNN. And what did you say?" Raskin shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixing on the water glass in front of him. He knew exactly what was coming. "Let's watch the tape," Trump said. The video played. It was Jamie Raskin sitting across from Jake Tapper, looking dismissive, almost bored by the question. "There are clearly lots of people who are in photographs with Jeffrey Epstein," the video Raskin said with a shrug. "He was very much of a socialite in New York and other places. I think we need to be careful about guilt by association." The clip ended. The word socialite hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "A socialite," Trump repeated, his voice dripping with incredulity. "You called a sex trafficker a socialite. You dismissed photos of a former president with a victim as just New York social life." A woman in the front row stood up. She was shaking. Her name was Maria Santos, and she had been holding a sign that read, Protect our children." She lowered the sign and looked directly at Raskin. "What about the victims?" she screamed, her voice breaking with emotion. "There is a girl in that photo. What about her? Is she just a socialite, too?" The entire room froze. Raskin looked up, startled by the raw pain in her voice. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some legalese about due process, but no words came out. Trump nodded to Maria. "That is exactly the question, ma'am. What about the victims?" He turned his fury back on Raskin. "You spent years on the January 6th committee subpoenaing phone records of grandmothers who walked through the Capitol. You demanded text messages from my family. You acted like you were on a holy crusade for truth. But when it comes to Epstein's victims," Trump asked, "when it comes to women who were trafficked and abused by powerful men in your party, suddenly you don't want to investigate. Suddenly you don't want to see the flight logs. Suddenly, Epstein is just a guy who threw good parties." Trump walked to the edge of the stage. "This is called tribal justice, Jamie. It means that if a Republican is accused of something, even with zero proof, they are guilty until proven innocent. You destroy them. You bankrupt them. You put them in solitary confinement. But if a Democrat is caught red-handed," Trump gestured to the photos of Clinton on the screen. "If there are photos, if there are flight logs, if there are victims, you look the other way. You cover it up. You call it socializing." He pulled a printed tweet from the black folder. "Here is what you tweeted about me," Trump read. "Trump's DOJ failed to release all the Epstein documents. We are in a lawless situation. You called me lawless for protecting ongoing investigations and victim privacy," Trump roared. "But when the photos of your friend Bill come out, you defend him. Where is your outrage now? Where is your demand for transparency now?" "The hypocrisy is sick," Trump said, tossing the paper onto the table. "You don't care about women. You don't care about justice. You care about protecting the tribe. And if you have to ignore a girl in a jacuzzi to protect Bill Clinton, you will do it without blinking." Raskin sat in silence, diminishing under the glare of the lights. The moral high ground he had tried to claim at the start of the event was gone, washed away by the images on the screen. He wasn't a defender of the vulnerable. He was a defender of the elite. "And speaking of defending the indefensible," Trump said, his tone hardening as he reached for the fourth folder, "let's talk about the people you did decide to prosecute. Let's talk about the lives you destroyed for political sport." The shift in the room was palpable. The Epstein segment had been about moral repulsion. This next segment was about anger. Pure, unadulterated anger. Trump's hand rested on the fourth folder, a thick red file labeled J6 Committee. "You want to talk about threats to democracy, Jamie?" Trump asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Let's talk about the biggest threat to democracy in modern history. Let's talk about your committee, the January 6th Committee." "That committee was a bipartisan effort to uncover the truth," Raskin interrupted, finding a spark of defiance. "We were investigating a violent insurrection against the United States government." "Bipartisan?" Trump scoffed. "You kicked the real Republicans off and kept two never-Trumpers who were looking for a job at CNN. That wasn't a committee. That was a casting call." Trump didn't open the folder yet. Instead, he looked out into the audience, scanning the faces until he found who he was looking for. "Sir," Trump said, pointing to a man in the fifth row, "would you please stand up? The gentleman in the blue shirt." An older man, gray-haired and weary-looking, stood up slowly. He held a baseball cap in his hands, twisting it nervously. "Could you tell everyone your name and what happened to you?" Trump asked, his voice gentle. "My name is Robert Henderson," the man said. His voice was quiet, but in the silent hall, it carried. "I'm from Pennsylvania." "Tell them what happened, Robert," Trump encouraged. "On January 6th, I walked through the Capitol building for about 20 minutes, Henderson said. "I didn't break anything. I didn't hurt anyone. I walked through an open door. I took some photos with my phone. And then I left." The crowd listened, captivated. 2 months later, Henderson continued, his voice trembling. "The FBI raided my house at 6 a.m. 15 agents, guns drawn. They arrested me in front of my grandkids. I was charged with parading in a federal building. A misdemeanor." He paused, taking a breath. "They held me without bail for 4 months, in solitary confinement. The guards said it was because I was a J6er. I lost 40 pounds. I lost my job. I pleaded guilty just to get out." Trump nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Robert. I am sorry." He turned on Raskin, the gentleness vanishing instantly. "Jamie, look at him. Does he look like an insurrectionist to you? Does he look like a terrorist?" Raskin stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The attack on the Capitol was a violent assault on the rule of law. Everyone who participated— "He walked through a door," Trump shouted. "He took a selfie. And you and your committee treated him like he was Osama bin Laden. You destroyed this man's life," Trump accused. "You held primetime hearings produced by a TV executive. You edited the tapes. You left out the parts where the police held the doors open. You spun a narrative to terrify the American people." Trump opened the red folder and pulled out a document stamped "Destroyed." "And here is the kicker," Trump said. "This is an inventory of materials your committee deleted before the Republicans took over the House. Transcripts, videos, Secret Service communications." "You destroyed the evidence, Jamie," Trump said. "Why?" "Because it didn't fit your story. You deleted the testimony that showed I offered 10,000 National Guard troops days before the riot. You deleted the testimony about FBI informants in the crowd." "That is not an investigation," Trump said. "That is a cover-up. In a real court of law, that's called spoliation of evidence. It's a crime." "We spent $18 million of taxpayer money on your little TV show," Trump continued. $18 million to ruin Robert Henderson's life." A young mother in the back stood up, bouncing a baby on her hip. "I can barely afford diapers," she yelled. "And you spent $18 million on a witch hunt?" The crowd roared in agreement. The economic reality of the average American clashed violently with the political gamesmanship of Washington. "But here is the real double standard," Trump said, signaling the screen. It split into 2 images. On the left, Robert Henderson walking calmly through the Capitol Rotunda. On the right, a police precinct in Minneapolis engulfed in flames during the riots of 2020. On the left, Trump narrated, a grandfather taking a picture. Punishment, solitary confinement, ruined life. On the right, Trump pointed to the burning building. Antifa and BLM rioters burning down a police station, attacking federal courthouses, causing $2 billion in damage, killing people. "And what happened to them, Jamie?" Trump asked. "Did you form a committee? Did you raid their homes at dawn? Did you put them in solitary?" "No," Trump answered himself. "Kamala Harris raised money to bail them out. Most of the charges were dropped. You called it mostly peaceful." "That is a 2-tiered justice system," Trump declared. "If you burn down a city for the Democrats, you are an activist. If you walk through a building for Trump, you are a domestic terrorist. You talk about democracy, Trump said, walking toward Raskin's side of the stage. But locking up your political opponents? That's not democracy. That's tyranny. Destroying evidence? That's tyranny. Running a show trial? That's tyranny. Raskin looked small in his chair. The weight of Robert Henderson's story, combined with the visual evidence of the unequal application of justice, was crushing. "You should be ashamed," Trump said quietly. "You took the power of the United States government and you weaponized it against your own people. And you did it all while your wife was cashing in." Trump closed the red folder. "But, speaking of cashing in," he said, "let's look at just how good life is for a socialist in Washington. Let's talk about your bank account." Jamie Raskin was slumped in his chair, a man physically diminishing under the weight of the previous hour. The exposure of the January 6th committee's destroyed evidence had silenced his supporters in the room. But Trump wasn't letting up. He reached for the fourth folder, a beige file that looked deceptively thin but contained the most relatable, infuriating data of the night. "We've talked about your corruption," Trump said, his voice shifting from the roar of the prosecutor to the conversational tone of a man chatting at a diner. "We've talked about your hypocrisy on justice. But now, Jamie, I want to talk about your lifestyle. I want to talk about the economics of being a socialist in Washington." Trump opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "You love to lecture the American people about privilege, don't you? You love to tell the guy driving the truck and the waitress pouring the coffee that they need to check their privilege. You love to talk about income inequality and how the system is rigged by the wealthy." Trump walked to the edge of the stage, holding the paper up. "Well, you're right about one thing. The system is rigged. It's rigged by people like you, for people like you." He signaled the booth. "Show them the numbers." The screen split into two columns. On the left was a photo of Jamie Raskin. On the right was a silhouette representing the average American worker. "This is Jamie's financial disclosure," Trump narrated, using the laser pointer. "Let's do some math. I know math isn't a strong suit for Congress, but stick with me. Congressional salary, $174,000, plus benefits, plus the best health care in the world. Teaching salary, American University, about $90,000 for teaching a couple of classes. Book royalties, estimated $100,000 a year. Speaking fees, let's call it $50,000. Wife's income, before the scandal, about $275,000. Trump circled the total at the bottom. Total annual household income, $689,000. He let that number sink in. Then he pointed to the right side of the screen. Median U.S. household income, $74,580. "Do you know what that means, folks?" Trump asked the crowd. "It means Jamie Raskin makes nearly 10 times what you make. It means it takes him about 66 days, 2 months, to earn what you work all year to scrape together." A small business owner in the middle section, wearing a stained apron from his shift, stood up. "I pay taxes on every dime," he shouted, "and he votes to raise them." Trump pointed at the man. "Exactly. And that brings me to the best part." Trump pulled out a voting record from the folder. "Jamie, you vote to raise taxes on the wealthy. You say the rich need to pay their fair share. But let's look at your tax returns. You take every deduction. You use every loophole. You pay exactly what the law requires and not a penny more." Trump looked at Raskin with theatrical confusion. "But Jamie, if you think the government spends money better than we do, why don't you write a check? The Treasury accepts donations. You could write a check for $100,000 right now to help the inequality you talk about. Why don't you?" Raskin's face was a mask of stony silence. "Because you don't want your money," Trump answered for him. "You want their money." The screen changed again. This time, it showed a photo of a large, beautiful Victorian mansion. "This is where Jamie lives," Trump said. "Tacoma Park, Maryland. Property value, $2.3 million. It's a beautiful house. Big walls, nice gates, safe neighborhood." "For comparison," Trump said, "the median home price in America is $420,000. Jamie's house is worth 5 times the American average." "And the schools?" Trump clicked the remote. A photo of Georgetown Day School appeared. "Tuition, $48,000 per year." Trump turned to the teacher, Rebecca, who was still seated in the front row. "Rebecca, you said you make $45,000. Jamie pays more for 1 year of high school for one kid than you make before taxes." "And here is the kicker," Trump said, his voice rising in anger. "Jamie votes against school choice. He votes against vouchers. He traps poor kids in failing public schools while he sends his own kids to the most elite private schools money can buy." "That is the definition of elitism," Trump roared. He pulls the ladder up behind him. He says, "Good schools for me, but not for thee. Safety for me, but not for thee. Wealth for me, but not for thee." Trump walked back to the table, tossing the paper onto the stack. "You know the difference between us, Jamie?" Trump asked, leaning against the podium. "I'm rich. Everyone knows I'm rich. I have gold toilets. I fly on private jets with my name on the side. I never hid it. I built a company. I employed thousands of people. I created something." He pointed a finger at Raskin. "But you've never built a thing in your life. You've spent your entire career in government and academia. You produce paper. You produce lectures. You produce outrage. You have gotten wealthy on the taxpayers' dime while telling the taxpayers they are the problem." "You are a limousine liberal," Trump said, using the old term with a new venom. "You want socialism for the poor and capitalism for yourself. You want open borders for Texas, but gates for Tacoma Park." "At least I'm honest about who I am," Trump said. "You are playing a character. You are pretending to be a man of the people, but you haven't pumped your own gas in 20 years. The crowd was on its feet again, not cheering, but shouting in agreement. The economic disparity, the sheer unfairness of the ruling class lecturing the working class, was the fuel that powered the MAGA movement, and Trump had just poured gasoline on it. "He makes in 2 months what you make in a year," Trump repeated, driving the point home. "And he thinks you are the privileged ones." Raskin looked down at his hands. The intellectual superiority he usually wore, like armor, had been pierced by the simple, brutal arithmetic of his own life. "But, Jamie," Trump said, reaching for the final folder, the thickest one of all, "the money is bad. The hypocrisy is bad. But there is one thing that is worse. It's what you tried to do to the Supreme Court to protect your power." The final folder hit the table with a heavy, ominous thud. It was labeled Supreme Court in bold red letters. Trump rested his hand on it, letting the silence build. The economic undressing of Jamie Raskin had been personal. This next phase was constitutional. "This is my favorite part," Trump told the crowd, though his face was deadly serious. "This is where we talk about Jamie's holy war against Justice Clarence Thomas. Because if there is one thing Jamie Raskin loves more than money, it's accusing other people of exactly what he is guilty of. It's called projection," Trump said, "and Jamie is the master." He signaled the screen. A tweet appeared, blown up to the size of a billboard. It was from Jamie Raskin's official account, dated June 2024. I never thought I would live to see the day where justices have their own billionaire sugar daddies who give them houses and automobiles and private school tuitions. Trump read it aloud, savoring the words. Billionaire sugar daddies. That's a nasty phrase, Jamie. Very colorful. Very accusatory. Now, Trump said, let's look at the facts. Let's compare the corruption of Clarence Thomas with the business dealings of the Raskin family. The screen split down the middle. Left side, Justice Clarence Thomas. Right side, Jamie and Sarah Raskin. On the left, Trump narrated, we have Justice Thomas. Over 20 years, he received gifts, travel, hospitality, from a man named Harlan Crow. Total value? Maybe $2 million over 2 decades. That's about $100,000 a year. Now, did he disclose them perfectly? No. And he should have, Trump admitted, disarming the counter-argument. But here is the key, folks. Harlan Crow is his friend. They have been friends for 30 years. And Harlan Crow never had a case before the Supreme Court. He never asked for a ruling. He never asked for a favor. He was just a rich guy being nice to his friend. Trump walked over to the right side of the screen. Now, let's look at the rations. In 2 years, your wife made $1.5 million. Not from a friend, not from a gift, but from a company that needed a specific government approval that she helped them get. Do the math, Trump said. Thomas got $100,000 a year from a friend with no business before the court. Your wife made $750,000 a year, 7 times as much, directly from influencing the Federal Reserve. You called Justice Thomas corrupt, Trump said, his voice rising. You called him a sugar baby. But his money came from friendship. Yours came from influence peddling. Who is the real sugar daddy here, Jamie? Is it Harlan Crow? Or is it the U.S. government? The crowd gasped. The comparison was stark. But it gets better, Trump said, pulling a document from the folder. Because you didn't just tweet. You introduced legislation. You want to reform the court. You want to pack the court with 4 new liberal justices. You want to impose ethics codes that give Congress power over the judges. You say it's about ethics, Trump scoffed. But we know what it's really about. It's about power. You hate the court because they follow the Constitution instead of your agenda. You hate them because they overturned Roe. You hate them because they stopped your overreach. Trump held up a letter. This is a letter from 200 law professors, including professors from your own university. Do you know what they said about your plan? He read from the page. Representative Raskin's proposals would politicize the judiciary to an unprecedented degree and undermine the independence that makes the court a check on power. Trump looked up. Your own colleagues think you are dangerous. They think you are trying to destroy the separation of powers just because you lost a few cases. And here is the difference in character, Trump said, walking to the center stage. The screen changed to show 2 photos. On the left, Clarence Thomas as a young man, growing up in poverty in the segregated South, living in a shack. On the right, Jamie Raskin as a young man, attending Harvard, the son of a famous progressive intellectual. Clarence Thomas was born in a shack in Pinpoint, Georgia, Trump said, his voice reverent. He spoke Gula as a first language. He faced real racism. He worked his way through Yale. He has spent his life serving this country for a fraction of what he could make as a lawyer. He is a self-made man. Trump pointed a finger at Raskin. You are a Nepo baby of the political elite. You went to Harvard. You've never known hunger. You've never known want. You've lived in a bubble of privilege your entire life. And you have the audacity, Trump roared, to lecture a man who crawled out of poverty about ethics? You, who hid your wife's millions? You, who destroyed evidence? You are not fit to shine Clarence Thomas's shoes. The room exploded. It was a visceral reaction to the class warfare Trump had flipped on its head. He had turned the black conservative justice into the working-class hero and the white progressive congressman into the symbol of aristocratic arrogance. "You accuse us of what you are guilty of," Trump said, summarizing the night. "You accuse Thomas of money corruption? You did it. You accuse me of obstruction? You did it. You accuse Republicans of being threats to democracy? You ran a show trial." "It is all projection, Jamie," Trump said, closing the final folder. "You look in the mirror, you see a tyrant, and you scream at us." Raskin was motionless. The intellectual framework he used to justify his actions, that he was the enlightened guardian of democracy fighting against the barbarians, had been shattered. Trump hadn't just beaten him on facts, he had beaten him on the moral narrative. "I'm done with the folders," Trump said, stepping back, "but I have one last thing to say to you, and I want the whole world to hear it." The silence in the Phoenix Convention Center was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that covered the 5,000 souls in attendance. Donald Trump stood behind the small table, his hand resting on the stack of 5 folders. They were no longer just office supplies. They were a physical monument to corruption. The red folder of the Reserve Trust scandal, the blue folder of the Biden defense, the black folder of the Epstein hypocrisy, the red folder of the January 6th tyranny, and the beige folder of the Raskin family's elitist economics. Trump looked at the stack. Then he looked at Jamie Raskin. The congressman was slumped in his chair, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth, his hands gripping the edge of the podium as if it were a life raft in a hurricane. The arrogance was gone. The professorial condescension had evaporated. All that was left was a man who had been stripped naked in the public square. "We have covered a lot of ground tonight, Jamie," Trump said, his voice quiet, but carrying to the back of the room with the force of a gavel strike. "We've looked at the bank records. We've looked at the timelines. We've looked at the photos." Trump began to stack the folders into a single teetering pile in the center of the table. "You spent 4 years screaming that I was a threat to democracy," Trump said. "You called me a tyrant. You called me a criminal. You projected every single one of your own sins onto me." "Do you know what projection is, Professor?" Trump asked, stepping out from behind the table to stand center stage. "It is a psychological term. It means accusing your enemy of exactly what you are guilty of, to distract the world from your own crimes." Trump pointed to the stack. "You accused Justice Thomas of financial corruption," Trump said, his voice rising. "But you are the one whose household made $1.5 million from a government connection you helped arrange. That is projection." "You accused me of obstructing justice," Trump continued, taking a step toward Raskin. "But you are the one who destroyed the evidence of the January 6th committee. You deleted the files. You hid the truth. That is projection." "You accused Republicans of running a kangaroo court," Trump roared. "But you are the one who denied due process to Robert Henderson. You are the one who put a grandfather in solitary confinement for a misdemeanor. That is projection." "You accuse us of not caring about the rule of law," Trump said, gesturing to the Epstein photos still lingering on the side screens. "But when your friends are caught in a hot tub with sex trafficking victims, you call them socialites. That is the ultimate projection." The crowd was beginning to stir. a low rumble of agreement building in the hall. "You look in the mirror, Jamie, and you see a tyrant," Trump said. "You see someone who believes the rules don't apply to him. You see someone who uses the government to get rich and punish his enemies. And because you can't face that reflection, you point your finger at me." "But the mirror doesn't lie," Trump said. "And tonight, the American people are holding the mirror up to you." "You came here to lecture us about democracy," Trump said, his voice filled with contempt. "But you are the threat. You are the danger. You are the swamp. You are the reason people don't trust their government," Trump said. "Because they see you making millions while they struggle to buy eggs. They see you sending your kids to $50,000 schools while you block their ability to choose a better school for their children. They see you weaponizing the FBI against parents while you protect the Biden crime family." Trump walked back to the table and placed his hand on the stack of evidence one last time. "I have 5 folders here, Jamie," Trump said. 5 scandals, 5 betrayals of the public trust. And I haven't even used the word insurrection yet. "But I will tell you this," Trump concluded, leaning into the microphone for the final blow. "You were right about one thing. There is corruption in Washington. There is a threat to our constitutional order. There is someone who thinks they are above the law." Trump pointed a finger directly at Raskin's face. "I'm looking right at him." The convention center exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a release of years of frustration. 5,000 people jumped to their feet as one. The chant started in the back row, low at first, then rolling forward like a tidal wave until it shook the rafters. "USA! USA! USA!" Jamie Raskin sat frozen. He couldn't move. He couldn't respond. He couldn't even reach for his water glass. He was completely destroyed. His handlers were already rushing the stage, signaling the moderator to cut the feed, desperate to get their man out of the spotlight before the damage became permanent. But it was too late. The cameras had captured it all. The receipts had been shown. The professor had been schooled. Trump stood calm and confident amidst the chaos, nodding to the crowd, the stack of evidence sitting like a trophy beside him. He hadn't just won a debate, he had dismantled a narrative. And as the Secret Service moved to escort him off the stage, everyone watching knew that the political landscape had just shifted beneath their feet. The chaos at the Phoenix Convention Center eventually subsided, but the shockwave it generated was only just beginning. As Jamie Raskin was hurried out a side exit by frantic aides, avoiding the press and the constituents he claimed to represent, the reality of what had just happened began to settle over the political landscape. This wasn't just a bad night for a congressman. It was an indictment of an entire ruling class. What happened in Phoenix wasn't about one man's hypocrisy. It was the exposure of the entire Democratic Party's corruption playbook, laid bare for all Americans to see. Jamie Raskin wasn't an aberration. He was the prototype. In the days that followed, the Raskin model became the primary topic of conversation across the country. It was the perfect embodiment of everything wrong with the modern left. A wealthy elitist who preaches socialism. A career politician who has never built a business but lectures entrepreneurs. A man who benefits from the system while claiming to oppose it. The pattern was undeniable once Trump pointed it out. Nancy Pelosi's husband making millions on stock trades involving tech companies she regulated, trades she claimed to know nothing about. Dianne Feinstein's husband receiving billion-dollar contracts for projects she voted to fund. The Biden family collecting millions from China, Ukraine, and Russia while Joe Biden was vice president. Hillary Clinton turning the State Department into a pay-to-play operation through her foundation. This was the business model. Get power. Use that power to enrich yourself and your family. Attack anyone who questions you as a threat to democracy. Rely on the media to cover for you. And when caught, claim it's a partisan witch hunt. But in Phoenix, the cover-up failed. Trump had brought the one thing the establishment fears more than anything else: receipts. The media, which usually serves as the Praetorian Guard for the Democratic establishment, found itself paralyzed. They couldn't spin the bank records. They couldn't explain away the timeline of the Reserve Trust scandal. They couldn't justify the Stock Act violations. For the first time in years, the New York Times and the Washington Post were forced to cover a Democratic scandal because the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. The exposure of Raskin also highlighted the terrifying reality of the two-tiered justice system. The American people saw the contrast clearly. Hunter Biden's laptop, verified by the FBI, was suppressed and called Russian disinformation by 51 intelligence officials who lied to influence an election. Meanwhile, grandmothers were raided by SWAT teams for walking through the Capitol. They saw Roger Stone arrested at dawn by 30 FBI agents with CNN cameras rolling, while those who burned down police stations during the riots had their charges dropped by progressive prosecutors. They saw Peter Navarro put in leg irons for contempt of Congress, while Eric Holder faced no consequences for the exact same charge. This was what Democrats meant by our democracy, a system where they hold power, their friends get rich, their enemies get prosecuted, and anyone who objects is labeled an insurrectionist. But the most significant outcome of the Phoenix confrontation was the shattering of the moral superiority myth. For decades, the left has operated on the premise that they are the virtuous ones. They care about the poor. The right cares about the rich. They care about justice. The right cares about power. Trump flipped the script. By exposing Raskin's $689,000 income, his $2.3 million mansion, and his elite private schools, he showed that the modern Democrat is not the party of the working class. They are the party of the credentialed elite. They are the party of the faculty lounge and the boardroom. They are the party of people who can afford to care about pronouns because they don't have to worry about the price of gas. The battle lines were redrawn that night. It wasn't Republican versus Democrat anymore. It was the corrupt establishment versus the American people. It was the swamp versus the country. It was politicians who see government as a way to get rich versus citizens who want government to serve them. Jamie Raskin represented everything Americans have learned to hate about Washington: the hypocrisy, the double standards, the lectures about morality from immoral people. And that is why Trump's exposure of him resonated so powerfully. Americans are tired. They are tired of being told they are privileged by millionaires. They are tired of being called racist by race baiters. They are tired of being labeled extremists by actual extremists. They are tired of working hard and playing by rules that don't apply to their rulers. The Phoenix confrontation proved that the system is rigged, but it also proved that it can be exposed. It gave hope that accountability is still possible. It showed that when you strip away the media protection and the high-minded rhetoric, these people are terrified of the truth. The professor got schooled in Phoenix, but the lesson wasn't just for him. It was for everyone watching. The system is corrupt. The elites are hypocrites. The media is compromised. But the truth can still emerge. Evidence still matters. As the dust settled, one question remained on the lips of millions of Americans who watched the clips, shared the videos, and saw the receipts. Jamie Raskin got caught. He got destroyed. The question is, who is next?